the deportation scandal involving, and I know some people don't like when I call it a scandal. What do they want to call it? The deportation celebration. But the story of the Venezuelans getting rounded up, along with some MS-13 members, and sent down to Nayib Bukele's dungeons down in El Salvador, broke through to the Joe Rogan podcast, partly thanks to friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald. Let's roll this and talk about what the resonance here.
You got to get scared that people who are not criminals are getting like lassoed up and deported and sent to like El Salvador prisons, like that kind of shit. Because I read some story. Was it Glenn Greenwald?
It was.
Yeah. The gay Barber guy.
Yeah.
It's scary, man.
Is that true? Is that story accurate?
I don't think we know.
Can you explain the story for people that don't know?
Well, from what I read, I think it was in Time magazine, Jamie, if you can pull it up, and maybe we can get it accurate. But basically, with a bunch of these Tren de Aragua guys, allegedly they got at least one guy who wasn't a criminal, who was just a gay barber who I think, according to the story, came here legally. He was here legally. That's what they said. Don't know if it's true.
Did he have a green card?
I don't know what the details are. Maybe Jamie can find it.
No criminal record.
From what it said in that story. Now, this is the problem, right? Because the mainstream media has been putting out so much shit that I don't know what to believe anymore, right?
I feel the same way.
And so it's difficult, but it's something that we actually brought up in one of our conversations. We interviewed the guy from the Heritage Foundation. We brought this up because I think we talked about this with Doge as well. When you do things quickly and you do things aggressively, that's how you get shit done. But that's also when mistakes get made.
Right.
And I think a human being plucked out of nowhere and ending up in a country he's never been in a maximum security prison with gang members, seems like a bad thing to happen to me.
It's horrific. It's horrific.
I don't think that should be controversial.
No, that's not controversial at all. And this is the thing, measured twice, cut once.
Yeah.
This is kind of crazy. That could be possible. That's horrific. And that's bad for the cause. Like the cause is, let's get the gang members out. Everybody agrees. But let's not innocent gay hairdressers get lumped up with the gangs. And then like how long before that guy can get out? Can we figure out how to get him out? Is there any plan in place to alert the authorities that they've made a horrible mistake and correct it?
Well, if you think about it from a government perspective, and this is where I think it gets quite sinister, is once you've done that, the incentive structure is never going to be to admit that and deal with it. The incentive structure is to say nothing, to cover it up, to pretend it didn't happen.
So if you've somehow missed this particular story, this is about a man named Andre Jose Hernandez Romero, a Venezuelan man who came to the United States in August. He said he was fleeing political persecution. He made an asylum appointment, came to that appointment. When he got there, they noticed on his arm that he had a tattoo of a crown. And this is from the court documents related to his asylum appointment. It says, detainee Hernandez ports, it's sick, it's an error. Don't know what ports, these ICE agents are not necessarily the best writers. Detainee Hernandez has, I guess they mean, tattoos, crowns that are consistent with those of a Tren de Aragua member. That's somebody at the Otay Mesa Detention Center put that into his documents. That sealed his fate. Now, we also know that apparently no Venezuelan gangs use tattoos. Whether that's true or not, somebody can maybe fact check me and find some small gang that does. Tren de Aragua does not use tattoos as identifying marks for its members. Like that is just a basic fact that is acknowledged across the spectrum about Tren de Aragua. Other gangs do. Somehow, some people in DHS got the idea in their head that there were crown tattoos associated with this gang, and so anybody from Venezuela who had a crown tattoo wound up getting classified as a member of this gang. We reported earlier about the man who was a professional soccer player from Venezuela who had a crown over a soccer ball, which was a reference to Real Madrid's logo, Real Madrid being his favorite team. He's a professional goalkeeper. Venezuelan authorities he got all of his paperwork, showed he had absolutely no gang connections, whatsoever. He also was scooped up and said to be this gang member. And so I think Rogan makes a very easily understandable point. And a lot of people agree that this is a case, measure twice, cut once. That's the perfect cliche to drop on this situation. Because once you cut, and this is why you measure twice, once you cut, that's it. You've cut. Once you have sent this guy to this El Salvadoran dungeon, you've done that. Even if they sent him there for 1 hour and he was beaten up and then returned, it's a situation so traumatizing it would define the rest of your life. 1 hour there. He's still there. That to me is what's so startling about this situation. So not only did you measure twice, you cut once. Sometimes you cut if you cut too far this direction, you can actually recut it. So the cliche can be overused, but they're not even trying to recut here. They're not even trying to fix this. So does this matter? Is there enough of a kernel of sense of justice and humanity left that it can penetrate the kind of Stephen Miller bubble here? Or is he so locked in on kind of revolutionary mode that he's just plowing ahead?
I mean, I thought that was a very incisive exchange between Rogan and Konstantin Kisin, partially because of what Konstantin said at the end, where he said the incentive structure is not to correct the errors. And that's really important here because, you have support for mass deportations when it's polled, quote unquote, mass deportations sort of in theory. So the abstract idea of mass deportations polls extremely well in this country. As majority of people want that. And so Stephen Miller, Trump, and others in the administration Kristi Noem, have looked at that and said, this is our mandate to do mass deportations. And the only way for us to do mass deportations, this is a logical leap that I think is insane, but is to screen for these tattoos and to take these kind of bubble cases and just everyone goes to El Salvador if Venezuela won't take them. And the public is so opposed to the Democrats' policies, to the Biden administration's policies, that we can get away with these extreme measures because the alternative is so much worse. And so to Konstantin Kisin's point, that's part of the background of why the incentive structure is not to say, all right, we made a mistake. The incentive structure is to double, triple, quadruple down. And yet what we've seen is the administration failed to supply additional evidence that, let's talk about the Barber in this case, he's significantly linked to Tren de Aragua and was a case that, demanded deportation to El Salvador. There's still a chunk of the public that has absolutely no sympathy for this guy. They just say it's, of course, I mean, if you're not a citizen, the administration can take you and move you and get you out. You don't have the same level of due process and et cetera. That's not going to fly with the majority of Americans. It may still be powerful with a group of the American people, but what we're seeing here in the Rogan clip is that you will start to lose people. It's going to start to look insane and un-American. And so the thing on that, we have this next shot of Caroline Leavitt getting questioned. This is going to be E2. It's also happening with the student deportations. It's a very similar dynamic playing out, I think, in both cases. And the administration has to start ponying up the evidence. The problem for them is they don't seem to have it in some of these really high profile cases. So let's take a listen to Caroline Leavitt here. This is E2.
Just changing subjects for 1 second. The administration has expressed a complete confidence in how all the deportation flights to El Salvador were conducted. But now that the administration has conceded that there was an error of one Salvadoran national, will there be any reviews conducted? And does the president express any thoughts on the one error that was disclosed in court last night?
Well, first of all, the error that you are referring to was a clerical error. It was an administrative error. The administration maintains the position that this individual who was deported to El Salvador and will not be returning to our country was a member of the brutal and vicious MS-13 gang. That is fact number one. Fact number two, we also have credible intelligence proving that this individual was involved in human trafficking. And fact number three, this individual was a member, actually a leader of the brutal MS-13 gang, which this president has designated as a foreign terrorist organization.
So Ryan, I think the best that the furthest you'll see Stephen Miller and his sort of fellow travelers go in this administration is to slow down and start being more judicious in the deportations, and maybe just hope it fades into the background of the news cycle. But this case that they're referring to is really interesting. We can put E3 up on the screen. This is a thread from Will Chamberlain, who people have seen on the show a couple of times, very staunch conservative pro-Trump attorney, who dug into the story of this Maryland dad, as The Atlantic called him, who ended up being accused of being in MS-13 and deported by the Trump administration. The Trump administration admitted he was deported due to a clerical error. And this gets us, Will goes through the case, and I think found legitimately a lot of things in the case of this man that The Atlantic, just from a journalistic perspective, left out of the story. Its audience would have been better served knowing the full saga of this guy's pinging through the American court system, non-citizens pinging through the American court system, why he claimed he suddenly needed asylum after being here for close to the better part of a decade. So it's an interesting case, but it's one that gets us back to the Konstantin Kistin point, where it's like the media has not done a good job of covering these things up until now. And so the Trump administration knows it can get away with more because there's so little trust in the media. That could turn around, though.
Yeah, and so that case and Will's thread is interesting because Will kind of elides throughout the whole point, or kind of sidesteps as an important issue, the fact that this guy was sent to this El Salvadoran torture chamber. And Will, in his thread, acknowledges that he should not have been, that was wrong, that legally he should not have been sent there. Yet he says, well, that's kind of like a minor point here. And I feel like Will's kind of losing the thread here. So basically what happened here, I think, so the guy came, it appears clear that he came illegally sometime around 2011, 2012, something like that, from El Salvador to the United States. In 2019, he was picked up at a Home Depot. And Home Depot is where day laborers, gather, and subcontractors go by every day. You gotta have your own tools. All right, I need people on a site. Come on. So he gets picked up there. He was wearing a Bulls jersey, and so they said the Bulls jersey was MS-13, which is kind of ridiculous. But then they also said they had a confidential informant who had knowledge of MS-13, who said, this is so-and-so, this is his name in the gang, this is his rank, and this is where he operated as a gang member. Turns out he'd never been there. The confidential informants are literally paid to lie. Like, the confidential informants are not remotely trustworthy. But this didn't get adjudicated. It just goes into a hearing, went into a bail hearing, and the police said, look, this CI says that this guy is in MS-13. And so the judge is like, all right, well, you can't rebut this. And so therefore, I'm not going to give you bail. He spent a year and a half locked up. Eventually, they concluded that this guy was lying. He was not a MS-13 member. He got out and he has various court dates, and then he goes into that very long immigration process, which I think everybody across the spectrum would agree is far too long. And he reapplies at that point for asylum, saying that and this is what Will gets into, that his family's pupusa business had run afoul of an 18th Street gang down in El Salvador. They were extorted. He was threatened. It does appear that his brother, like, that definitely happened to his brother, and his brother fled. So there is some real truth to these claims. The question of whether 10 years later the threats are still live, that's an open one, and that's the kind of thing that you then kind of adjudicate in an immigration hearing. Instead, it seems like what they did is they were just looking for anybody with any gang affiliations, and I guess he popped up in the computer because of his old 2019 confidential informant claim that he was in the gang, which had since been basically rejected. And because he was moving forward with his asylum claim effectively, there was an order that he not be deported to El Salvador, and they ignored that order. And so that's what they're saying was the clerical error. They're saying what they're saying is they should have been able to deport him somewhere, just not to El Salvador. And they're saying, well, that's mistakes happen. It's like, okay, but that's a pretty huge mistake. And also, secondly, like, you sent this guy to a dungeon from which he may never emerge. Like, for what? Like, for what crime? Let's say you don't like that he entered the country illegally. Okay, then you deport him. If you don't like that you're barred from deporting him to El Salvador, overturn that. Say, look, the gang, 18th Street gang, Bukele wiped them out. We can now deport him. So fix that paperwork and deport him into El Salvador, where he then continues his life as a free person in El Salvador. To put him in chains and fly him down to this dungeon, that's the part that, like you're saying, is that should be un-American.
And at the same time, I look at the Atlantic as someone on the right and think, why was so much of the story left out, even in the interest of time? And I feel like that's where things, to the point Konstantin Kistin was making in the clip earlier, end up getting locked up. Because to me, it's very important that these stories are told correctly, because there are cases that are more sympathetic than these. People who claimed asylum right away and do have credible fear. This is more credible fear than this, even if there's some evidence that he may have had fear. We're 10 years, as you said, 10 years beyond that point. So it's a different calculation than some others, and so it's hard for people on the right then. Not, I'm happy to say it, I'm not in the administration, but for the administration, they feel like politically they can get away with doing these things because people care when the media botches it, and Biden lets a net 8 million people into the country and basically nobody talks about it except for the media ignores it for a long time, or relatively ignores it for a long time, and doesn't tell the story. So anyway, all that is to say, I think, this is what's likely to, the best case scenario is that they start to slow down and be more judicious about this. And Ryan, one of the things I wanted to ask you is that it reminds me of your story, the drop site story, about the guy who Bukele did not want. And maybe you can, I know you talked about it, but what if they accidentally do that? What if one of those guys gets caught up in this?
So we did this story, Jose Olivares and I, over at Dropsite. It's a fascinating piece. He took the lead on it, going through court records relating to some of the MS-13 members that were deported down to El Salvador. And there's an absolutely fascinating story behind it. And it's not what anybody would expect from what they hear about Trump and Bukele. Bukele, when he first came to power, negotiated, and denies this, but everybody knows that it's true, negotiated a secret deal with MS-13 where they would agree to reduce levels of violence in exchange for some détente with the state and some improvement in prison conditions for MS-13 leaders who were already in prison. At some point, eventually, this peace accord with MS-13 broke down. More violence broke out. Bukele launched his kind of more aggressive crackdown on them. But before that happened, MS-13, as part of its deal with him, pledged election support, and his landslide election victory was significantly a result of this secret deal that he cut with MS-13. This secret deal is talked about a lot in El Salvador, but is and is very, very unpopular, but he maintains a complete denial of it to this day. One of the people who was involved in those negotiations, his gang name is Greñas. He's here he was here in the United States, charged with, RICO and all the different things you charge a gang member with, and he was headed to federal court where he was expected, as part of his trial, to tell the full story of these secret negotiations that Bukele had with MS-13. Bukele has desperately been trying to get his hands on Greñas. And there's been this push and pull where the U.S. has been trying to get its hands on people that they know were involved in this deal, and vice versa. That one of them was in El Salvadoran prisons, what we write about in the article. The U.S. had an extradition request out for him. Instead, Bukele just let him go. And Bukele's top official, who had negotiated this secret deal, drove the guy to the border to get him out of the country. He then gets caught in Mexico, and then El Salvador and the U.S. have a fight with Mexico over who can get this guy, because everybody wants these top MS-13 leaders who know the story of what Bukele did. And so now Trump has now sent some of them. So that was Bukele's price. He's like, I'll charge a very tiny fee. He's not looking for dollars to house these Venezuelans that the U.S. is deporting there. His price was, he's like, I want these guys that know too much about my dealings with MS-13. I want them under my control. So Trump has sent some of them, but we've still held on to others as sort of blackmail against Bukele. So the story is always a little bit more complicated and interesting than you're being told.
But when you're starting to use humans as pawns like this at a rapid clip, we'll see where some of those cases end up going. It was a great story. Just before we leave this block, there's another case. We can put E4 up on the screen of a Minnesota student from Mankato who's now been caught up in these ICE deportations. Ryan, do you have any insight on this? I mean, it's actually kind of hard to keep track.
Yeah,
of everything that's going
it's
on.
another student who, some very minor protest activity, presumably appeared on some list that a pro-Israel group sent to the administration. The Canary Mission, Betar, and others are, very proudly advertising that they are producing lists of students that they want kicked out of the country for protesting against the war. The war, that is, they're very clear. They're not claiming, we have evidence that this is the person that was swinging the hammer that smashed the glass at Hinds Hall. They're not saying that. They're saying that this person wrote this op-ed, as in the case of Ozturk, or this person came to this encampment, or this person tweeted this thing, and then kicking them out of the country. And Rubio has said that he's canceled upwards of 300 student visas and is continuing to do it every single day. Despite, when you apply for a student visa, it doesn't say anywhere that when you get to the United States, these certain liberties that we hold dear for persons in the United States do not apply to you if you are protesting U.S. funding Israel's war in Gaza. That was never said. If that's the new rule, now obviously it's quite okay if you're here on a student visa to protest for the war. It's not that you can't weigh in. It's not that you can't have an opinion on what's happening in Gaza. As long as your opinion is that it is good and the U.S. should do more of it, that's fine. It's if you are critical of what the United States is doing with its support of Israel, then according to Rubio, that is cause for you to be immediately deported. Well, not immediately. That would almost be more humane. First, they're sending these people to detention centers, completely harmless people, having them sit in these brutal detention centers for very long stretches of time before then deported.
And with those 300, with that 300 number, I mean, we've seen maybe half a dozen really big cases so far, but what that means is there's going to be a drip. And again, maybe this will happen with immigration, maybe it'll happen with students, and the administration will try to move it to the background and be, quieter about it, be slower about it. Who knows? But the drip is coming no matter what, because they've staked a lot on these efforts. So it's not going to end. We'll continue to see cases like this one.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.